Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our podcast series where we discuss all things innovation, entrepreneurial, and apparel. So, today we have with us our Chief Innovation Officer for MS Holdings, Ranil Vitarana. Hi, Ranil. For a change, I'm asking you the questions and you're in the hot seat. Welcome to our podcast. So, to start off with, let's go with your trajectory that brought you to becoming the CIO of MS Holdings. How did that journey look like?
My God, I can talk for a few days on that one, but I don't think I ever set out to be a CIO, or I didn't have a clue of where my journey went. Only thing is that I studied as an engineer, and I was pretty certain that I didn't want to be purely an engineer, and that I wanted to do something that had some element of business and creativity and things like that. Especially in those sort of that day and age, you were cast, right? Either you were a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer or something like that. So I was kind of sort of mold. But very soon into my degree, I realized that I had this other special power, as it were, to bring business and engineering together. And then as I sort of started off in the industry, it became apparent to me that I was like the translator. So I could explain things technical to people who are not technical, and I could explain things that were not technical to people that were technical. So I define myself today as a more translator. And that person who bridges certain areas. And so that's sort of I would say that's what laid the foundation for me to be able to, to come to this position. But it was definitely not something that I had planned. And if you ask me 10 or, 20, 30 years ago, what was I going to become when I grew up, I had no clue.
Right. So we have this empty bottle over here, Ranil. Do you want to take us through what that signifies for you?
Yes. So I was brought up. Both my parents were government servants, although they were both professionals. And although as I grew up, I was never short of anything. I was never rich. And also, we somehow knew what not to ask our parents. And so as you grew up, you sort of knew these things, if you asked, they would give it. Other things, they had never said no to me for anything I've asked. But then you also don't ask because you know the circumstances they are under. So as we grew up, 17, 18, everyone used to go for parties and stuff, and then used to always borrow someone else's perfume and stuff like that. And so with my very first job that I had and very first pay packet that I got, I went and bought this. This was, at that time, the coolest perfume that you could have. There's this and another one called Draka, but and this I've always had with me just to show me how I started and what it means to not have things and want things, and how you want to go out and get things. So this is just something that I'm probably the most proudest of this.
And when you look back in your journey here, are there certain things that you're extremely proud of, or that you like going back to, or drawing examples from?
Yeah, I would say that quite a few things. Well, let's put it this way. I think for me, I'm a person who has always studied human behavior and human nature more than anything else. So as I have gone up, as I progressed along my career, I've really been inspired or been inspired by actually people, and then deciding, looking at them and understanding what about them makes them special, what about them makes them make this kind of decisions, I actually also draw a lot of inspiration from people who do things that are wrong, because I can look at it and then say, why is that person doing it and why is it wrong? And then therefore I have to make sure that I shouldn't repeat it. So those are like lessons learned. I think I learn more from people's either mistakes or things that they do that I don't agree with, more than so as a result, through my life, I've learned from the different bosses I've had and also my colleagues, and I couldn't say there are one or two things that are, I would say, very very defining, but I am very proud of the fact that I have been through 2 recessions without losing even one of my staff. And for me, that's probably my biggest achievement, that I have managed to keep my team together through probably the darkest hours of their and my career. And for me, that is something I'm very proud of.
Yeah. And you've mentioned your team, Ranil. Innovation itself is a different kind of a challenge. And the people that go through highs and lows that are quite different to your traditional roles that you take. How do you keep your team motivated?
It's easy and it's difficult. I think it's easy if you understand the nature of what you're doing and that you cannot be 100% right 100% of the time, and you know that you're well-intentioned and you've tried to go and do something, and if you fall short of it, other people might look at you as a person who has not achieved, whereas I would look at it as, okay, what did we learn from this and how do we make sure that we don't make that mistake again, or what can we do better next time, and things like that. And so for me, I think that just that approach of how you together look at it, I think makes them feel comfortable that you're not looking at them as a failure. So as a result, so then for me as an individual, that person becomes more valuable because they now have that experience of what they've learned from that mistake or from that experience. And I always say that even myself, I am a sum of my failures. Although people might want to look at me as a sum of my success, for me, very clearly, I'm a sum of my failures.
Is there a failure that you want to bring up that you've had like a lot of learnings from? I know everyone thinks you are now CEO. Sounds like a great place to be in, but took a lot of work to get there and a lot of failures as well, I suppose.
Oh yeah, many things. I've actually been sacked.
Really?
Yes. And again, I don't think it was a failure. I just think it's a way that people look at different things. I've had maybe some success with certain technology launches, very, very big ones. Other technologies that we put a certain amount of money behind maybe haven't taken off quite so much. And then looking at that, you sort of try to understand why is it that it's not being successful? Yeah. And then you also learn from that, right? So it's not just about having a good idea, it is about how you execute on it is the second thing. And then thirdly is whether the world is ready for it or not. And so the thing about innovation, I always say, is that it's a little bit like American football. So you throw the ball not to where the player is, but where you think the player is going to be. And so if you're throwing that ball 50, 60 meters ahead, and you're expecting that person to be there, the chances that those things are going to coincide is relatively remote. And so you can do two things. One is that you throw more balls, right, in the hope that they'll coincide, or you have to be able to either predict where the person is going, or you sort of say, okay, that ball went there, but okay, since someone else will come and pick it up, it might not be at that time. It might be a year later, 3 years later, or somewhere. So you have to have that kind of patience to do that. So that's sort of, I would say, being a entrepreneur who's been known to bring out, we say, technology. Therein is one of the biggest problems that I face.
Right. And then how would you measure success in a situation like that?
In entrepreneurial sense?
Yes, and also in innovation, I feel like the investments that you make into technology doesn't actually reflect on like an account book or anything. It's an intangible sort of a asset. But how do you communicate this to everyone else? I'm sure you understand.
Yeah, so I have this example that I talk about, right? It's and I've seen this very much in New York, where you're walking down the street and there's a restaurant which has a queue of people standing outside it. And there's a restaurant on the other side and maybe another restaurant on this side. Both have empty seats. And so the question is, how come they're all three are doing the same thing? They're satiating your hunger, right? And they're purveying seemingly the same thing, which is food. So why is it that these two are empty and the other one has a queue in front of it? And therefore, for a business or an industry or anything like that to succeed, you want to have that queue. You want to be the business that has that queue in front of you. And in order to do that, it's not just about the product you make, it's about what you stand for, it's about the customer service, it's about the ambience, what people feel to be associated with you, that all that brand and everything that you're building. And so in order to do that, there are so many things that need to come together. So some of them is differentiating technology. The others is that you are seeming to be innovative and you seem to know what you're talking about, or you're thinking futuristically. All those things are things that draw people to come and want to work with you, right? So, and especially when you're working in a country like Sri Lanka, where cheap labor or the best raw material sources are not your forte and you have to find another way of doing it. All of these other things like your sustainability angle and social sustainability, environmental sustainability, as well as this innovation part of it, is all a catalyst to sort of get people to come to you. So I wouldn't say that it's a failure or that dealing with a failure. I think it is that some are harder than others, and like I said, the timing might be wrong or the value proposition might not resonate with it. But I think it still goes to attract people to come and be standing in that queue in front of your restaurant.
I actually found out recently that you own the most amount of patents at AMS. How do you become a prolific innovator?
So I would say there's two ways of doing that. One is that I get everyone in my team who has a patent to put my name on it. But that's not the way I did it. It's a question. But I don't know. What I do is when people come and I'm talking to people and you have these ideas and you sort of keep generating ideas. So you share these ideas with people, and then I have a wonderful team that can really take it and run with it and make it a reality. And then also sometimes when they come up with something that is not working, then I can also give them ideas on what works or not. And then thirdly, I think I also enjoy this whole patent business, because if you really get it, you can own or control a large space without really having created that entire space. The example is like you could be, say, riding, say, a three-wheeler on a road in such a way that no one can overtake you, right? So you are about 1/4 of the width of that road, but you drive it in a way that no one can overtake, right? The patent world is also a little bit like that. You can inflate yourself and make sure that no one else can, own that part of the road that you're on. So that I think I enjoy as well, and so that has also helped me to create this IP.
Interesting. And are there any specific problems that you're solving at the moment with this team that really excites you right now?
So I think there are sort of trends that are happening in the world that you want to be part of and things like that. And for me, I think a couple of areas that we're exploring. One is this whole gamer side of it and trying to see there's this gaming area that is growing really exponentially, and seemingly everyone you meet is gaming in some way or the other. And they've been like a hidden force, and they've only been consuming data and computers or hardware. And so we're trying to understand, really, is there a way that we can get a soft goods solution that might help them to perform better and things like that. And seemingly, but as you sort of start delving into it and trying to understand what can you do to differentiate yourself, there is I think a nice, cool opportunity that we can sort of create, and that sort of excites me in that area. Another area is the whole medical space. Historically, if you talk about medicine, you have some solution, and it is something that is like hardware, right? It's a plastic or a metal thing, and you put it around yourself, and then everyone knows you're wearing it, and it's very obvious to the whole world. But now, as people are sort of living longer and longer and longer, so those days when I can remember when I was young, a 50-year-old person was someone who was old. Today, 60-year-old people are like running marathons and things like that, and so as people start living longer, they are also living longer with real problems. And for those active lifestyles, they're going out and just not staying in the house. And so those people start needing these solutions that we can provide that gives them what I call normalcy. So normalcy is where it appears like it's a regular piece of clothing or textile or something, but actually it's got hidden powers. And it's giving you that boost and making you go about your business, appear and look normal while you have something, that it's taking care of.
Right. And you mentioned how the consumers or the group of people that you were providing solutions to have changed. How has that progressed over the years? Where are the consumers at now?
A 30 or 35-year-old person doesn't think twice about going back and living with their parents, or for them the experience is far, far greater than the asset that they own. So even now, even in our office, there are so many people who don't even aspire to drive or own a car. And why should you? Because you have Uber. And so there is a whole generation that's coming up like that. And even more importantly, they are starting to see and point out to some of the mistakes that their parents' generation made, like over-consuming and not valuing the planet and the whole choking business and cutting trees and forests and the whole thing. So the consumer is definitely changing. I think they're going to buy less things. They're going to spend, I think, less money on objects or items. They're going to spend more and more money on experiences. And so as a result, we also have to change and really continue to be that shop or the restaurant with that longest queue outside. And so as that consumer changes, we have to change our value system to resonate with the value system of that new consumer.
Do you think with COVID things have established that a bit more? Or has that changed?
So I think COVID really helped people to put things into perspective. And a lot of things that people valued, and I think they were wrong values, especially of this generation, of being, especially when it came to relationships, they were very transactional. And you could, it was almost like a social media thing that's what, that messaging is what really made a good friend or not a good friend and all that. I think, and for me being from a different generation, that was really worrying that people were so superficial about their relationships. I think that became a little bit, what shall I say, more defined around what is real and what's not real and what's fake and what's important versus what's not important. So I think that has, again, that together with this other value system around protecting the planet and the value of life and all those sort of things, I think that has really helped this generation going forward to be even better than what they might have been had it not for it.
Right. So you mentioned the planet. So do you feel that things are moving now more away from fit, style, and how things look, and then more towards durability, sustainability angles as well?
No. Sorry. I think historically if you were a person who believed in the planet or a socialist historically, you were the worst dressed person, and you had dreadlocks and what I mean, earrings, and there's like a whole stereotype of what a person who cared looked like as opposed to a person who didn't. I think that stereotype is not there anymore. You could be a person who cares about how you look, how you appear, all those sort of things that are there, and still be conscious of the planet and everything. So as a result, I think a majority of people are thinking in that way. So and you can't really distinguish that, but those people do want to work out and get all the benefits that science can give them to do better in what they do. I think they're a clever and educated workforce.
How is innovations in the apparel space supporting this right now?
In lots and lots of ways. So I think apparel and textile is, what shall we say, I think it has a massive impact on the planet. They say it's the second largest polluter. I'm not sure about that. I think it's about how you define these things. But I think the making of it utilizes a lot of water and things like that. Then there's all this chemical waste that comes out of it. Then you have the use case related things that people want to wash it so often. But most importantly, there is like, I don't know, if you look at your own wardrobe and just go and count how many items there are, each person has, I would say, 400 to 500 different items of clothing that they have, of which probably about 20 is what keeps getting used, and maybe 50 at a stretch. And so we are hoarding all these resources, and then eventually one day it's all going to go into landfill, etc. So I think our industry, there's so much we can do to innovate around how do we make that whole experience that I think is needed, because it gives the human confidence around themselves, how they appear, what they look like, and the fact that it aids them in their day-to-day living. But how do we do it in a manner that is much more sustainable? How do we reuse a lot of those resources to get it back into use, so that we are not competing with other things like food and areas like that. So I think there's a lot that can be done. However, because we are a very fragmented industry, there is no big So you don't have a Toyota of this world, or you don't have a Nissan of the world that can spend a lot of money researching something that's good, because apparel industry is so fragmented. There are maybe a handful of people who are multi-billion, but most people are much, much smaller.
So to succeed, do you need to be that company that provides one of those 20 products?
Not really, because it's like this. Everyone in the world wears a piece of clothing, right? And so we will never be able to, as a single entity, you will never be able to supply all of them or even a fraction of them, right? So you're really aiming at a really tiny thing. So I think statistically speaking, Sri Lanka provides 0.25% of the world's clothing requirement. And I think when they say that, they don't mean the entire world's. I think they talk more around the Western world's requirement, what is exported. But you have like China for China, India for India, massive, massive things. And so if you look at that big picture, Sri Lanka in its totality, I think is a fraction of what it goes. So for me, in that sense, we have to choose the right consumer, the right value proposition, and we can sort of own it.
So Ranil, what do you look for someone when you recruit them to your innovation team?
So multiple things. When we're trying to create a team, we want to find people who are not necessarily the cleverest people or the people who do the best in their exams, but we are looking for people who are clever, who are able to switch between subjects and learn things very, very quickly, people who are self-motivated, people who are curious. And so essentially, as they come into our organization and they start doing projects that are very, very different, and each project might be very different, and you might be going from learning science in one and then into something like engineering, and then the next one it's about consumer, and so you're trying to bring all this together and create a product or a solution. You need people who can really flip between these different things, and suddenly you have to do FDA approval, or so you're constantly learning more than you're practicing. So as a result, we're looking not for subject matter specialists, but people who are much more generalists and who can jump across different things.
Right. So rumor has it you only used a good job twice on someone in their 15-year-old career. How does that work?
Maybe not 15, maybe it's about 10. But okay. I think for me, every word or everything I say has meaning, and I don't want to. I try to maintain a sort of a standard, and I also try to maintain it as a standard for everyone. So as a result, if I say good job, I mean it. It means that you've achieved that higher standard, for instance. But later on in my career, I've realized that has become a sort of demotivating factor sometimes, and almost in certain instances, it's like a badge of honor that they got a good job from Ranil. So I've actually become a little bit more liberal with my praise of people, because I realize that also goes to motivate people. So I think some of the people who are with me for a long time probably got less of it, and the people in more recent times are probably getting a lot more praise than before.
Okay. So we're quite lucky you just joined recently.
Yes, you're lucky, yes. Great. Maybe I don't mean it as much.
Wow. I need to look for another word now. But yeah. So interesting. Do you mentor people right now? And if someone wanted to become a CIO of an innovation organization, how do they go about it? What would you kind of tell them?
Okay. So I do mentor people. I actually think of my whole life as that I am mentoring people. That I always say that I've had not that someone is working for me, that I've had the privilege of having these people pass through me as in part of their career. And so as a result, what I do And if you ask me, what do you really do? I think I build people's careers and I become really happy of their achievement. And so, honestly, I would never tell anyone this is what you need to do in order to become a CIO.
Right.
Innovation is something that is necessarily has to be in your blood also. It's very difficult to teach it. And especially to become like a CIO essentially means that you're also starting to take a lot of risks. And they don't pay off. You also have to be that frontline person who absorbs a lot of the pressure that the corporate is giving and making sure that your teams continue to stay motivated, various things like that. So but if I had to bring someone through to say the innovation journey and becoming that, primarily is that you are conducting one giant experiment, right? And so everything you do and say is actually some kind of assumption that you're making. So for instance, you're saying, I don't know, this, right? And it's a good example actually. So this is a product called Spring that we make. It is used to give compression. So we made this assumption that people wanted compression, right? And that you essentially put it around your leg. I'll just put one on just for now. And this will create this wave of compression. And it's sort of a massage and increases your blood flow. Back it sort of operates like a second heart. And that there will be a need and a market for it, etc. And so as we started developing this product, and we made lots of assumptions, we said that it needs to be really small. It could be something that you can wear like this over your clothing or under your clothing. We assumed that it could be sold at $120 a pair, various assumptions that we made. And so as a result, as you start developing this product and through the whole experiment, essentially you're trying to validate all of these assumptions that you're making. And you start by taking the riskiest assumptions, your most far-reaching assumptions that will affect your business, and you start validating those, right? So innovation is, there's no magic wand and this is exactly the way to do it. You can't predetermine success. So it is just this constant experiment that you're doing, and the faster you get your results, especially to those critical ones. Like for instance, this product is now actually sold at $249 a pair. We went into market to sell it at $120 a pair. But everywhere we went, and even I went to some shows and put this on people, and because they were coming, we were only putting one on, like this. And when people used to ask me, how much is it? I was like, $120. And they're like, for one. So $240 for two. And I was like, no, it's $120 a pair. Oh, that's really cheap. So then we thought, okay, there seems to be like people are willing to pay $240 for it. And then we said, okay, let's put it at $249. So now it's been selling at $249, and that's, again, that makes such a big difference to be able to create a business at a product at $249 versus the same product at $120. Gives you so much more money to advertise, acquire customers, and things like that.
So for all of you watching this podcast, do go to the description below, and there's a promo code for these pair of springs at springme.com. So Rana, back to you. What would you say is the biggest challenge that you have in your current role at the moment?
The biggest challenge, I think, is the fact that innovation takes time. And I think less and less people have patience for anything that takes long. I think that whole instant society is that it's what is there. So people are expecting to see results and things becoming a reality overnight. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with the unknown and with technologies and developing things that are first to the world, there is a time lag with that. And so I think for me, that's probably the biggest challenge, is just to get people to understand that.
And what do you think should be the next frontier that apparel unlocks or apparel looks into?
So I have this saying, which is, I say that textile is the wonder material of the world that is the most underrated. And the reason I say that is that unlike any other material, it's so flexible, but it's so strong, right? You can hardly break it. You can hit it against a stone. You can, constantly bumping into things. There's so much abrasion. And you wear this like constantly, and it lasts while it's being that flexible and squishy and all those things that you want it to be. No other material in the world has that kind of quality and that kind of ability to last long. And so this material, I still feel that it is still in its infancy in how it is utilized in everything that we do. So you're seeing, so I'd say you're seeing increased use of it. So I know that there are some spacecraft where they're using it as what they call a sail. So as a sail, there are other instances where people are using it in medicine as inserts into your body and things like that. And I feel that more and more this can start coming into everyday life. So everything that is solid, like I say a bulb, right? Today is very inflexible. We can make that whole, so instead of the lamp shade being with the bulb in the middle and the lampshade being on the outside, we can make the lampshade the bulb, right? And so you have this whole, you can have a throw that you can, throw on your settee, and it can take a different shade. It can change its appearance. It could be a print at one time. It could be stripes at another time. It could, and still while it's feeling nice and comfortable. So I feel that there's a lot of intelligence that we can put into it, a lot of smarts we can put into it, and we can really take it to that next level. And so for me, it's the wonder material that's still underutilized.
Right. And if we give you and the team a blank canvas with anything you could ask for, what challenge would you choose to solve?
If I could choose something to solve for, I think I would still take a challenge in the medical field. I think there are people in the world still living with, limbs that are not functioning properly, kids, and again, using, say, a smart material, we can mimic muscles and allow people to have that normalcy in life. And so I feel that there's a ability for us to really make a difference in the lives of lots of kids. And I feel that giving that normalcy to a kid is so rewarding, that they can play around with their age group and literally be normal amongst them, I think is something that I would really like to. It might not necessarily make a lot of money, but like you said, it's a blank canvas. So.
What other technologies should MAS invest in, maybe looking at the next 10 years?
So I think energy is a big thing. I think the way energy is utilized, stored, and given back, right? So I think there's so many ways in which we can harness energy. So it could be a fabric or it could be anything else that you have in the sea that through that constant movement you're generating energy. It could be something that's just under the tar on the road that is capturing energy. So I feel there's a lot of opportunity around that. The second one is if I had money today, I would put into the ability to recycle material and be able to utilize it again. So the amount of quantum of material that we waste, so that's like zero cost raw material. So if you can go to zero cost raw material, everything will become cheaper and you can utilize it more. And so for me, that I think is definitely one area that I would think MS should go into.
And going back to your role as CIO, when you took on the role of CTO, Chief Technology Officer, a couple of years back, and your vision at the time and now several years after, where you are or where the organization is, how do you feel about it? Is there any pivots that you would have preferred to take? Or, and what kind of plans do you have for the future?
So as a CTO, to be honest, I didn't really know what my job was. When I took the job itself, I said, I've never done this before. I don't know whether I'll be the right person to do it. But so I won't say that I came into the role with like some major vision or anything like that. However, we chose a few areas that we felt there would be impact. So areas like onshoring technology, a lot of what we do is offshore, so there's so much transportation happening, things like that. So I believe that we should be able to take a lot of what we do and onshore it. And it's not as simple as you just say, like, take it back to the US or UK or whatever. It means that in order to take it back to that country, you have to make sure that the biggest issue around it, which is the impact it has on the environment. So if you're taking dyeing back into the UK or US, you have to make sure that there is no environmental pollution. You have to make sure that it doesn't require 100 people to do it. If you're taking garmenting back into those countries, you have to make sure that there is a level of automation that goes on that requires very little skilled labor to be involved in that. So a few things that we're doing now, we are actually taking those back. We have a project out in Europe. We have another project out in the US-Mexico border. And where we will start manufacturing there for certain industries. So for me, in that sense, it's a success because we managed to find unlocks that fit into those strict guidelines that those countries have in regards to labor, in regards to affluent environmental impact, all those things. So we managed to create those solutions and take those to the West, as it were. Areas that we would continue to work on, that was the question, right?
Yes, areas that you would continue to work on.
Yeah, so I think the industry is still possibly only about 10% on the way of what it can be from a technology perspective. And I spoke about it earlier. It's a highly, highly fragmented industry. Very little research dollars, right? Very few big players, right? Everyone knows the 5 or 6 big players, but there are about 300,000 smaller players that are there. So it's very difficult to take a technology and change the industry because it will take so many years for that to lag. So as a result, there's a lot of opportunity for us to innovate in this space. But I think we have to come together as an industry, at least 4, 5, 6 of the big players, together with some governments, and stipulate and legislate certain things that we have to do, which is in the greater good of humanity. And that, I think, will encourage much more innovation in this space in terms of making it a less impactful industry in a harmful kind of way to the world. So I think that's the area that I would put more effort on if I had.
Are we closer to getting a more sustainable product, do you think, at this point?
One or two products, yes, but an industry, no.
If I were to ask you, what would be your legacy? What do you want your team to remember you as your contribution? What would that be?
I think I would want them to remember me as a person who empowered them, made them believe in themselves, that really educated them to, not educated, I guess, sort of shared knowledge, etc., and made every experience a learning experience so that they could go and achieve greatness far more than what I have.
Two more questions just outside of MAS. Outside of your work life, what are you most proud of?
Few things. So for me, one of my, I come from a family that has been in politics a lot, in every type of politics. I didn't want to get into politics. But I still want to have impact on the country. So my stated aim is to make sure that Sri Lanka's scientific community comes and works with Sri Lanka's industry to make Sri Lanka a knowledge-based industry as opposed to a raw material-based industry. So in that sense, we've managed to engage with quite a few universities here. We've bought some technologies that they have created, and we were also part of SlimTech when it was being set up, and now I'm involved in what's called the SLibTech, which is Sri Lanka Institute of Biotechnology. So I'm really, I'm not sure whether I can be proud yet, but I'm at least on that journey of being able to set up these kinds of sort of a ecosystem that will bring that industry, academia, collaboration in order to take this country to where it can be. So for me, that is really something that I wouldn't say I'm fully proud of yet. I wouldn't do a good job for myself in that yet. But it's something that I'm working on, and hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, it'll be something I can achieve.
So that's where we'll find Ranil with that.
Hopefully.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ranil, for being part of this conversation. It's been extremely insightful, and I wish you all the best to make innovation what you plan it to be. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Limali.